it turns out that the F-100 is quite an interesting aircraft with quite a history and a personality to it.
The Dash 1 is not enough. Documentation of how things were implemented, that isn't necessarily something you can get your hands on anymore.
Hello and welcome back to the channel. This is Prickly Hedgehog, something a little different today. We sat down recently with Grinnelli Designs, who are producing the F-100D Super Sabre for DCS World, and I was curious to know what was the motivation for this particular aircraft, and also wanted to learn a little bit more about Grinnelli Designs and why they were motivated to produce this and what they are doing for DCS World. So let's begin with that question with Grinnelli and his team as we talk about the F-100 Super Sabre for DCS World.
All right, sure. So the history of Grinnelli Designs, it was formed, years ago. I want to say probably formally 5 to possibly even 7 years ago, when we wanted to start creating mods for DCS World in the form of the virtual air racing. And we all kind of came together, friends from, being players together, and everyone kind of had their own unique skill set, whether it be programming or art. And we kind of all came together and started working on bringing the virtual air racing series to become a reality. And once we got to a certain point that we figured out we could actually make a module from scratch, it kind of snowballed into what else can we do and how can we grow. And we brought everyone together that we've basically known each other for years. We've participated in different activities together, whether it be combat or the virtual air show content that was being done in the holiday seasons. And it really just kind of snowballed into, we have an opportunity here to do something with this passion that we all have, and why don't we try to chase that? And it brought together guys like Sloan and Nelson and Brandon and Thomas, and everybody kind of has their own, skill set that allows us to really make a module to compete with the best of the best that's out there right now. I feel like with all those guys brought together, it opens the door not only for us to kind of get our feet wet with the F-100, but where we can grow and go from the F-100 project.
You guys already have, I think, other modules in the game, including the F-22 mod, correct?
Correct. The F-22 was really what we decided would be a great way for us to experiment with making a module for DCS World, not having to worry about getting every last detail of documentation, because quite frankly, it's impossible to get that documentation. So we had some lateral freedom to create a module the right way from the aspect of the game, the simulation side, and then it gave us a little bit of creative freedom on the flight model and other kind of systems and other development that would later become much more relevant in projects like the F-100 and beyond. The F-22 really was never intended to be anything more than a learning experiment, and then we wanted to release the content to the community because we all kind of share the same. We were players, then we became modders, and now we've kind of stuck with it for so long that now we've all become developers of the game. So it took a course that led us to where we are today. The air racing stuff was a passion that Brandon and I shared, that we really wanted to bring a high-performance propeller aircraft that we could do the Red Bull style air racing, and we could do the Reno style air racing. And there were other people in the community that have done it before us and really kind of paved the way. But coming into it, we wanted to try to add to it and leave the community with more than what we found it with. So that's why like our philosophy was really, if we could make it, we want to distribute it for the people to enjoy.
Cool. Well, you mentioned quite a few other people there and lots of other people with passion for DCS World who have now, I guess, morphed into the Grinnelli team in some respects. So who else is with the team and what do they do?
Sloan? Oh.
Just go down the list. Go down the Discord list in order.
Yeah, so I'm Josh, or Jay Nelson, and I've been working at Grinnelli Designs for about a year now, and about 8 months full-time, I think, Grinnelli, right? Originally, I worked on the F-4 Phantom for heat blow simulations, and I did the radar and the RWR and the weapons for that. And then after that released, I put my sole focus on the F-100. And yeah, I've known Grinnelli for a long time through the modding community, because I've been one of the maintainers for the A4. Me and a friend, we made the EFM and stuff for that. So so me and Grinnelli have known each other for a long time. So it was the natural choice to come and work on the F-100. And on the F-100, I do kind of the lots of the systems and the radar warning receiver, that type of stuff.
Cool. So, Nelson, what's your background then to allow you to have that expertise?
Yeah, so I have a physics degree, which is my primary education, and then after leaving university, I worked for an electronic CAD company for a couple of years, and then after that, that's when I moved into Keebler and did all that stuff. So
cool.
I played DCS for a long time as well, like everyone else here. So DCS has kind of been the main passion, and being able to work on it is fantastic. So yeah, jumping at that opportunity.
So having that background in physics must be particularly helpful for DCS World then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is really nice because I get to use the things I learned during my degree and learn lots more things. I didn't really know much about radar when I started on the F4, other than the kind of things everyone knows. And then through that I learned all kinds of stuff and made that. But yeah, it's good fun.
All right, who's next? Sloan?
Hi, I'm Sloan. I'm a systems developer here at Grinnelli Designs. I do a lot of the systems. I do a lot of the DevOps. I met Grinnelli doing virtual aerobatics, and then I joined him for the Edge 540, and I've been working with him ever since. I was studying to be in cybersecurity doing network penetration testing, but the opportunity came up to do a third-party project, and I jumped on it.
Cool. All right. Well, Thomas?
Hi, so yeah, my name's Thomas. I joined Grinnelli Designs probably like I came onto the project about a year in, and I've known Grinnelli for a while now, mostly in the virtual air show scene, and all of his mods and whatnot. He kind of caught wind of some art I was making of a Super Hornet, and he kind of saw the quality in it and just decided to bring me on as a sort of a lead 3D artist role. And I've been working on the cockpit now for about a year, and so I'm mainly responsible for a lot of the photogrammetry and some of the nice shots you see in some of the reels we put out and whatnot.
Is that a challenge these days with the way in which third-party teams and even ED are doing, photogrammetry, laser scanning, that kind of stuff? The bar seems to be set pretty high right now for the artwork involved and the rendering and all the rest of it. It's what you see in game is extremely realistic. Is that a challenge?
Yeah, just the bar is set pretty high, and it is pretty challenging sometimes to hit that bar in terms of the visual quality. But I think people are going to be really satisfied with the office of the Hun.
Is DCS then the primary focus for Grinnelli? Do you have modules and other franchises, I guess, or irons and other fires?
Well, right now our sole focus is going to be on DCS World. I think we're all DCS players longer than pretty much any other running simulator, although we all have dabbled with the other options that are out there. I would say that we remain open-minded to dive into some of the other options that are out there, but DCS really gives us the control to provide the highest quality fidelity flight models, the best looking art, the most accurate and detailed systems, And it really just encompasses this full package, including weapon employment, damage modeling. It's second to none right now. And there's so many airframes that we want to chase after moving forward that there's no other place that we really want to do that than DCS World. But in the end, we are effectively trying to run a business, and we're a startup, right? And it's capital is difficult, and manpower is difficult, and these things take a lot of time. And once we've really locked in our development process with DCS, then we can start to expand and look into other opportunities, and start bringing maybe some of the newer content that we've done into those. But right now, we really just want to hit a home run with DCS, hyper focus on DCS, and provide the absolute best quality we can to the consumer.
So what was the motivation then for producing the F-100D? You talked about so many different aircraft being available. What was the motivation for choosing this particular aircraft over any others that perhaps are out there that you were interested in doing or looking at?
So that's an interesting one. The qualifications and requirements that Eagle Dynamics has for third-party developers is fairly strict and quite hyper-focused on what they want. And a few of those bullet points would include proof of subject matter experts and proof of documentation and the information that's really required to deliver a full fidelity module that meets the expectation of the community and Eagle Dynamics quality control. The F-100 was not the initial aircraft that we went to them to request, but the initial requests, which will remain a mystery for now, were not particularly denied hard off the bat, but there's possibilities that other third parties may or may not have contracts for these particular airframes. And the F-100 was number 2 on our list because we had access to these SMEs, and I was working on getting access to the airframes that actually exist in Fort Wayne and the Collins, Texas airframe. So we checked all the boxes with F-100, and it wasn't taken by another third party. And it really was a nice intro aircraft for us to come out as an official developer. The aircraft does quite a bit, but it's not a supercomputer with 1,000 MFD pages and documentation that we really might not be able to get our hands on. And the whole project kind of aligned where they gave us an opportunity to chase the F-100 as our initial project development. And I think everyone was pretty happy that that turned out to be the case, because it turns out that the F-100 is quite an interesting aircraft with quite a history and a personality to it.
Cool. Then why don't you tell us a little bit about the history of this aircraft so that those in the audience who are listening maybe are unfamiliar with it can learn a little bit more about it. Tell us a little bit about the history of it. Where was it used? Who was using it? And what kind of roles the aircraft had? What kind of weapons, etc. What did it do?
So maybe I can start this off, and then the other guys can fill in some of the extra blanks. F-100 was America's first supersonic delivered airframe. It was developed in the 50s and later improved into the Vietnam War and survived a little bit after. The F-100 was primarily used in the Vietnam War as a fighter bomber. It flew more sorties than any other airframe in the Vietnam War conflict. 360,000 plus sorties were flown by these F-100 pilots. It's absolutely crazy. And it really provides the bridge between the earlier like F-86 and MiG-15. The America needed an extra edge, and supersonic flight and supersonic intercepting was next on the list of what the Air Force was really looking for. And North American Aviation was able to deliver on that, although it came with some drawbacks. Early models of the F-100 had smaller tail and shorter wings. It was subject to lots of adverse yaw and difficulty in flying. We lost more pilots in training, I believe, than we lost in the actual conflict itself. And as it evolved from the A to the C and then later the D, which is what we're delivering, they attempted to put a bigger tail, added wing fences, longer wings, reinforce the wings on the fuselage body. The pitfalls became band-aided to a certain degree, but in the end, the Air Force did really rely on the wit and skill of these Air Force pilots to wrangle this F-100 airframe into a usable combat airframe. The weapons and roles that it played, I think Josh can speak to.
Yeah, so I mean, the F-100 is kind of similar to other aircraft of the era. It can kind of carry lots of dumb bombs, rockets. It can carry sidewinders. It can actually carry 4 sidewinders, which is quite surprising for the era. But and that's kind of pretty much it. There's not really any. There's no computer or anything. But so the primary method of delivery is manual. For the air-to-air, as I said, sidewinders. It has 4 M39 revolver cannons, which are the same ones in the F5E. And if you actually combine the fire rate of all of those, it's the same as a modern-day Vulcan cannon.
Oh, wow.
With more ammunition. And also to assist with aerial gunnery, it has a lead computing optical sight, the ones that people will be familiar with if they've flown the F4 or the F5. It's not credited with any air-to-air kills in Vietnam, but there is one, I think, unconfirmed Sidewinder kill, right, Grinnelli, I think?
I believe it was MiG-17 that...
Yeah,
I think I've heard of that story. So we're talking a pretty analog beast then, pretty analog kind of machine.
Yeah, so the primary thing is manual delivery of bombs, cluster pods, sidewinders, rockets, and then the guns, and of course something.
Napalm?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Napalm?
It did, yeah. It's something we would love for ED to implement, but it's not something we really have much control over at the moment. And then the other thing that we'll be implementing, we've already partially done, is the Sabre. You could mount a strike camera on it. So already we have implemented a gun camera. So when you pull the trigger in our plane, if you have the camera turned on, it will record the footage of your HUD and capture your kill if you kill something. And then you're able to save that footage to your hard drive afterwards, and you can open up the clip and see what you did after the fact. And it doesn't need anything out. You can be looking around in the cockpit doing whatever, and it will still capture that footage. So
that's cool.
It's pretty neat. And so we're gonna include that with the strike cameras as well, so you can capture blowing things up and stuff as well. So one thing I missed, it was the first wild weasels, right, Grinnelli? They were the first to employ shrikes, and they were used to find SAM sites.
Yes,
the wild weasels.
The Misties were effectively the first ever wild weasels. They were primarily focused on the F model because of the rear seat. It gave a little bit of task saturation, was taken back and passed on to the backseater to try to implement the Shrikes. But it definitely played a enormous role in paving the way for what later became much more viable in the Phantom and the Thud and other airframes that move forward into future conflicts.
And notably, the sets which they used in the F were similar, were the same as the ones in the D, the radar homing and warning receiver. So it's like a little scope, and instead of like our conventional radar warning DCS where they give you nice numbers for all the SAMs, it just gives you a line, either like a solid line or a dashed line, depending on the different type of radar bands and stuff. So it's very interesting, and it gives you raw audio, so you hear all these radar pulses, and it's very noisy. So it has quite a charm to it.
I know that kind of flying does have a lot of appeal to a lot of DCS players now. That analog experience, that more organic experience, is one that has a skill set in its own right.
There definitely can be, I think, a different kind of skill curve when it comes to the older jets. I think you're much more relying on your flying skill, especially with the Sabre. It's very easy to plant it into the ground.
Cool. Does anybody want to add to that? Any other thoughts or comments about the history and use of the aircraft?
No, I think it was covered pretty well.
All right. Well, let's look at another topic then. Maybe we can talk about the artwork, the development, bringing the whole thing to life. We talked about photogrammetry and stuff like that before. Tell us a little bit about that development process, the thing that brings this aircraft into the virtual DCS world.
Well, on the art side, we have captured photogrammetry. We've done structured light scanning. We've done tons of sound capture on both aircraft that are operational and aircraft that are sitting in hangars and whatnot. On the code side, we have developed our own flight model tool that lets us run through minutes of simulation in just a few seconds with very repeatable inputs so that we can compare different values for the flight model across many different tests in a very short period of time. And it accelerates our flight model development quite a bit.
Cool. I've mentioned this before about, or at least I've noted discussions in the past about development of the flight model. Is that one of the more challenging aspects of the production of these aircraft in game, to get the flight model, or am I misinterpreting what I'm reading or hearing about from teams?
It certainly is. I think one of the reasons it's so difficult is, DCS, it takes a while to load, and it's not particularly automatable. In order to develop a good flight model, especially as you start fine-tuning more, you need to be repeatable. You need to be able to do the same test with the same inputs over and over and over again to compare values, and it's hard to do that when you're hand flying.
Yeah, we have hundreds of tests for the F-100, like things like max roll rate tests, excess power, which is where you're measuring how much thrust you have compared to how much drag you have at different regimes. And all of those data points, it's fine to fly it once for a real life aircraft, but as Sloan said, if you're tuning it, you need to be able to run that test instantly and see what the result is. And so we with the flight model tool, we've made this interface where we can basically write a nice Python script and make use of the tools in Python to plot and optimize and all this stuff, so that we can write these tests and they can very quickly go through and replicate all of the real world tests that we have, to ensure that everything's super accurate.
So how useful is it then to have actual aircraft to climb over and look in and scan and all the rest of it to build the virtual model?
So it's very valuable because it removes the guesswork entirely from just the scaling of the entire the plane in general. So the cockpit is entirely, for the most part, based off a F-100 at Warner Robins Air Force Base, a museum there, and we had a complete unlimited access to this aircraft to get whatever we needed. And so the whole cockpit is all based off this one aircraft that was flown by
General Goddard.
Rick Goddard. And it's this aircraft was pretty much exact down to the bolt in the cockpit. It was wonderful. And so it's all, we captured an entire photogrammetry scan or a model of the entire cockpit. So everything is exactly where it should be. And we take that and bring it into our 3D program, and we get the scaling all set up, and it's all the guesswork is completely removed, and you're just kind of it's like a big color book at that point. You just kind of model over what you need to model over, and it's the whole cockpit is to kind of hit the level of art we need. We're using all the usual suspects of game art, so we're making high resolution model that we then bake down to a low resolution model. So you're going to have all those the nice bevels and whatnot, and optimized geometry in the entire cockpit. And I think people are really, really going to enjoy the office of the Hun.
Have you been able to get hold of things like you're going to be doing the pilot model and that kind of stuff, the safety equipment right from the get-go?
Well, I'm a little bit of a nut, and I've been buying up all these relics that I can find on eBay, and one would include the helmet and the mask. We've also acquired parachute and some gauges and radios and just a ton of stuff. And
He's got a problem.
I do think I might have a little bit of a problem. By the time we're done with this plane, we're going to have an F-100, being built in the backyard, I think. And it'll probably be pretty close to complete by the time we're done with this. But, I'm so intrigued by the history and the engineering of all this equipment, and being able to hold the flight stick from an actual F-100 in your hand and get that perspective of, this is what it feels like. We've all flown with, different Warthogs content and the Verpal and whatnot. Nothing, all those sticks are massive compared to the actual size of the F-100 stick. And just actually being able to hold one of the gauges in your hand and say to yourself, like, wow, the course indicator is about how big I would think it would be, but the AC and DC load meter gauges are microscopic. They're like the size of a quarter, the actual face of the gauge. And when you're in this airplane with, 24 gauges in front of your face, and the whole thing is shaking, and you're doing 500-600 miles an hour, there's a lot to kind of consume. As an operator of the airframe, it's pretty wild.
You guys were able to actually get hold of real working aircraft too, weren't you? So, and I think also some subject matter experts as well, former pilots, etc. Right? Tell us a little bit about that. How was that helpful and all? What was the outcome of that?
So we had a really crazy bit of opportunities pop our way that really changed the engagement level, I think, from all of us. And a few of those included being invited to Ohio to visit the museum with a dozen Sabre drivers that were stationed in Phan Rang. They kindly let me come out and sit with all of them. We brought a laptop and an early access version of the plane. I had all of them sit down and get behind the virtual airframe and kind of give us some feedback. We've also had opportunities to go to Fort Wayne with Mr. Cutshall, gave us basically unlimited access to his entire ground crew as well as himself to kind of get feedback on how the aircraft flies, what to expect, what are some of the hyper nuances that you would only know if you had done it. And that also transcended into working with Diesel Thunder, who's a volunteer for the Collins Foundation. They gave us unlimited access during the Houston Air Show, as well as a couple trips prior with a Mr. Rick Sharp, who was the gentleman that piloted the aircraft for the air show. We got to sit down with him and really look at everything that was going on in the plane. They let us sit in the back of the plane when it was running to film a little bit. They let us put GoPros in the rear seat so that we could observe all the, indicators and the way the needles move, the way it sounds. And it really just changes the entire perspective and overall understanding that allows us to not only make an interesting and engaging module for DCS, but we can now preserve this history and preserve it accurately to the points that they've provided to us that really transcend this into a legacy. We want to capture their legacy and really just preserve that as long as we possibly can so that the younger generations can kind of get that experience and that taste of just how insane some of the missions were, how difficult it was to operate these airframes, and just appreciate the overall sacrifice that was made by all these remarkable people that operated the F-100.
And having access to the airframe, was there anything that stuck out at you? Something that you didn't expect? Having, physical access to it as opposed to just diagrams or images and things like that. Was there anything that sort of surprised you about the aircraft, seeing it in the flesh, so to speak?
Thomas?
So I guess one thing is I was surprised by how small the cockpit is. It's really actually quite a tight fit in the cockpit. It was certainly kind of like just being hands on with it and whatnot, and just seeing everything properly scaled and whatnot. I guess just being hands on with it was a really unique experience. And
let's talk a little bit about what DCS customers are going to expect to experience with the aircraft compared to, say, some of the other aircraft that are currently in the game. The quirks and idiosyncrasies of this particular aircraft over other airframes.
Yeah, I mean, the F-100 really is quite the plane to handle. It's got just huge amounts of adverse yaw with its ailerons, and when you get it up to high angles of attack, that's basically what leads you into the saber dance, which is the famous issue that killed many pilots. They did, as Grinnelli said earlier, they did try and fix it with a large rudder, but still very much happens in the plane. And we did a test the other day, and I think about 3 or 4 people, test pilots, crashed because of that very issue. Because it's just really difficult to fly, and like the engine as well. I mean, it's quite an old engine. It's quite prone to compressor stalls. If you slam the throttle or something like that, it will compressor stall quite easily. And the other thing is like the afterburner can. We've got 2 different afterburners on the plane, but the earlier version of the afterburner can take up to 2 seconds to light sometimes.
Oof.
And while it's lighting, you lose all the thrust because the nozzle is wide open, and sometimes it doesn't even light at all. So it's a very, very interesting and difficult plane, just purely from the handling perspective. There is a very basic yaw and pitch damper in it, but they really aren't gonna save you if you're wallowing around at low speed. But it's quite a fun plane to fly. It's one of my favorite planes to fly in DCS for sure.
So this is all, no fly-by-wire. It's all hydraulic and analog cable linkages, that kind of thing.
Yes, yeah, it's completely just it's got 2 hydraulic systems for the flight controls, and that's it. Like you can get connected straight to the controls through the hydraulics. So there's other than those 2 dampers, which really don't. They just damp rates so that you don't yaw too much or pitch too much. There's not really anything stopping you and there's nothing really between you and the aeroplane. So it's and we really want to give that experience to the player. So we're focusing on like sounds and the shake and stuff to make sure that you really get an impression for what the plane is doing. Because I mean, usually in a real plane you would be able to feel those things. So we kind of compensate for that a bit.
So that's definitely one of the challenges in a video game, where you can't recreate all of the G-forces and things like that. And I've seen this in racing simulation as well, where you are very much reliant on a couple of things, sort of sound and also some sort of shake or visual representation of what's going on.
Yeah, this is one of those things that really relies on subject matter experts and their experience with flying the real thing. Like you would expect like flying a plane over the speed of sound to be like a bumpy experience, but there's lots of reports that actually it's glass smooth. I'm sure it depends on the plane so much and stuff, but yeah, some of it's common sense. Like if the wings are stalling, you would expect and we know that there's buffeting, then you would expect the plane to shake. And I also think it's important to give. We'll be making sure to have like a slider as well, because I know some people don't really like cockpit shake, and so we'll put a slider on there so people can tone it down to their level.
Nice.
But yeah, we really believe in how important it is to give that secondary feedback, because it's actually night and day. When you take the plane and you take all of the sounds at it's normally the reverse. You take an empty plane and you put all the sounds in, shaking in. You just realize immediately how dead the plane was without anything. When you're just flying around with no shake and no sound, it's a completely different experience, and it's way less immersive when you put in even placeholder sounds. So yeah, really important, and hopefully something that really adds immersion.
So tell us a little bit about the systems then. The radar, for example, does it have a radar?
So the F-100 has the APG-30, which is a range-only radar. It's the same radar that's found in the F-86 Sabre. In fact, the F-86 Sabre and the F-100 both share the same sighting equipment. So it's actually identical. So the radar is primarily used for ranging the gun in the LCOS mode, line of sight. I forget the I can't remember off the top of my head, but the gyro stabilized gun sight that everyone kind of expects from this era of plane. So it ranges for that. There's a backup mode where you can use the width of the sight to range that. And then other than that, to use the air-to-ground weapons, really you're relying on. You can use the gyro stabilized sight for air-to-ground with the guns, but with everything else, you're going to have to be relying on manual bombing or rockets with depression tables and flying in with your correct airspeed, dive angle, and then dropping at the correct altitudes and such to make sure that the bomb gets on target, which can be fun as well because it's its own skill curve to try and get those things dialed in. The weapon systems actually in the F-100 are quite weird. In planes of the same era, like the F4 and the F5, really you have like a bunch of switches for each pylon, where you would select the pylons you want to use, and those are the things that you want to drop. In the F-100, it's almost like they tried to do a modern kind of weapon selection system in a really old plane, and they do this with like basic circuitry. The crew tree sets a bunch of switches in the back based on what weapons you have mounted on your plane, and then when you want to use bombs, you just select bombs on the plane, or when you want to use rockets, you just select rockets on a weapon selector, and the plane knows what pylons those are on. So it's kind of unique in that regard. But
so it's all manual then.
But yeah, it's all manual bombing, and then of course we have the sidewinders as well, which I think lots of people know about. But the primary air-to-air weapon.
You mentioned the Shrike earlier. Is it capable of carrying the Shrike in this variant?
The Shrike is primarily used, was used on the F-100F. I mean, Grinnelli.
We've had discussions about what we want to do with that. Yeah. It's undecided right now. I believe if we can get the appropriate information on employment and functionality, that we would like to bend the rules a little bit and try to give the F-100 as much of the experience as we possibly can. It was never really truly used or employed per se on the D model, but it's effectively the same pylons, it's the same airframe, the wings the same. I mean, it's all the same thing with the exclusion of the back seat. So they're never say never, but it's definitely one of those things that in development, we're trying to make this airframe as accurate as humanly possible, but we also realize that DCS is a simulator. It's a game that's sold, that's for consumer enjoyment, and we want to bring as many of those items to the table that allow you to get the fullest experience. Having said that, the D model was still used with the radar homing and warning to triangulate where these SAM sites were, and then they would bring in bigger dogs later in the war, like the Thud, the 105, or even potentially F4 Phantoms, and they would work joint operations, doing this wild weasel and elimination of these air threats to then, get closer for the close air support and other, important missions that the F-100 had to execute. while other airframes had their, strengths to play into.
Yeah. The interesting thing about the Shrike is if we do decide to go with it, the technology that we've developed for the radar homing and warning receiver will make it very straightforward to implement that for the Shrike.
I would
So, yeah.
also say, despite the simplicity of the actual F-100's radar, we have done some rather extensive work to simulate it as accurately as possible. You'll find air-to-air gunnery at very low altitudes quite difficult due to terrain object and ground clutter.
Yeah, it's almost overkill. But it's yeah, as Sloan says, it will be pretty interesting to try and get a radar lock at low altitude.